Hello, everybody. I'm Aisling O'Gorman. Thanks, Aideen and Clara, for the introductions there. So you're all very welcome. We're delighted to have you all with us this morning, and thank you all very much for taking the time to be with us today. I'm the Creative Arts Manager at the ARC, and as Aideen said, part of my role is leading the work we do supporting artists in their development. So we run a number of different initiatives around that, and this event is kind of forming part of that. As we all know, we've all had to do lots of somersaults and pivoting and kind of reimagining how we work over the last 6 months, which has been hugely challenging. So we basically just wanted to share our experiences of that so far, in the hopes of it being of benefit to others, but also of benefit to ourselves, to just take that moment to reflect and consolidate what we've learned so far. So the structure of today's event is I'm just going to start off with a little bit of context for our summer program, which was called The Beautiful Beasts at Home, which is the main thing that we're going to be discussing today. And then I'm going to introduce our three panel artists and hand over to them so that you can hear their experiences and their reflections on being part of that program during the summer. Before I do that, I just wanted to take the moment to give a big thank you to all of my ARC colleagues, all of them who are on this call and more, and others who aren't here with us this morning, who, as always, with great team spirit, helped make this program happen. And we would also especially like to thank the three other summer artists who aren't part of the panel, which is only for reasons of time, that we couldn't have all 6 people on the panel this morning. And that is Monica Munoz, Lucy Hill, and Anita Mahan. And we just wanted to say a big thank you to them also for their contribution and being part of our summer program. So just to move on and give you a little bit of context to The Beautiful Beasts at Home. When we went into shutdown, the ARC initially went through a phase during April of sharing material from past programs, much of which we kind of repurposed in a hurry to be able to share some sort of resources with both teachers and parents who were now at home and trying to, in many cases, fill that role of a teacher. But we ran out of material at a certain point. It only kind of got us so far. And around the beginning of May, we knew this was going to go on for longer, and we were going to have to start actually making new work and making new programs, but using digital means to do so. So we have never done anything like this before. So we basically just dreamt it up in a hurry. And with the support of all the brilliant artists that we worked with, we came up with this program called The Beautiful Beasts at Home. The focus of that program is really largely around online workshop practice. So that was kind of the bulk of the program. We started in June by delivering workshops for our access schools, who are all schools that are geographically quite close to the ARC, and we have an existing relationship with them. So that felt like kind of an easy door to push because we already had a relationship with them. And it was also an opportunity to really start to try out a workshop practice with children. At that stage, children were all at home, but the school was still the conduit for making the workshop happen. So we ran a very successful couple of weeks in June with the schools program, which gave us great heart. At the same time, we were planning to do public versions of those workshops and other workshops for the public audience through July and August. So that was all being confirmed as well at the same time. Over the course of those 3 months, June, July, and August, we delivered events in visual art, music, drama, creative writing, dance, and I might be forgetting something, but basically a big array of different art forms, which gave a nice richness, I think, to the program, but it also crucially gave us the chance to actually try out lots of different disciplines in this format and to figure out what would and wouldn't work, because they're all a bit different, and they all have different needs. And so that was an incredibly useful exercise, as it turned out. We were also very pleased with the public engagement throughout the summer. And overall, I think we were all pleasantly surprised with how well things went, despite all the compromises, frustrations, and challenges along the way. So that's the bit of background about the summer program. And as I said, we've got 3 of the artists here today with us. So I'm just going to introduce them in turn. So we're going to spotlight Duffy Mooney-Sheppard now. And I'll tell you a little about Duffy. So Duffy is a visual artist, and she has devised and led a very significant number of our live online workshops during this summer for children between the ages of 5 and 12. And Duffy delivered workshops for both public audiences and for school audiences. Duffy is a visual artist, and she's a recent graduate of the MA in Children's Book Illustration from the Cambridge School of Arts. And she's drawn to the process of story making in particular as a way to explore visual ideas and to share her curiosity about the natural world. She's many years of experience working creatively with young people at the ARC and also elsewhere. And she has developed facilitation methods which are based in playful observation, imagination, and telling told tales. Earlier this year, in response to the COVID crisis, she independently founded the Little Island Arts Club, which is an online arts group classes for children and adults. And you can find out more about Duffy on her website, which is duffydraws.com. I'm now going to introduce Dave Rudden. So this is Dave, everyone. Dave is a writer, and he delivered a series of very engaging online creative writing workshops for children. These were for ages 7 and older. And Dave primarily worked on our schools program as part of the Beautiful Beasts at Home this year. Dave's first novel, Nights of the Borrowed Dark, was the 2016 Children's Book of the Year at the Irish Book Awards and the UNESCO Dublin City of Literature Citywide Read in 2017. He's been shortlisted for the Hennessy New Writing Prize, the Northern Irish Book Award, and was the 2011 winner of the Fantasy Book Review Short Story Prize. His first Doctor Who anthology, 12 Angels Weeping, was released in October 2018. And in the last 2 years, he has performed in over 500 schools, libraries, workshops, conferences, literary death matches, and 1 pumpkin festival. And you can find out more about Dave on his website, which is daverudden.com. And finally, but last but not least, I want to introduce you to Joanna Parkes. Joanna has created and led a series of online drama workshops for children aged 2 to 4, inspired by Aesop's Fables, which was part of the ARC's Beautiful Beasts at Home program. So she kind of represents our very youngest audience on this panel today. Joanna was the 2nd recipient of the John Coollahan Early Years Artist Residency at the ARC in 2019. She's been working in the field of creative arts education as a drama facilitator for many years and in many different contexts. Her practice uses participative process drama methods, underpinned by her strong belief that drama provides people of all ages, from toddlers to 90-year-olds, with wonderful opportunities to investigate the world and their role in it through play and imagination. Joanna also completed a Master's in Early Childhood Education, which specifically examined the role drama can play in supporting children's holistic personal development, and this reinforced her belief in the profound transformative power of drama and early engagement with the arts. So now I'm going to go back to Duffy, and we're going to start with Duffy, and Duffy's going to chat us through some of her highs and lows, challenges and successes with her experience on the ARCS program this summer. Over to you, Duffy.
Hi, it's always so hard to start talking. It's like, what's going to come out of my mouth? Hi, everybody. We'll start there. Yeah, great. Thanks, Aisling, and thanks, everybody. And thanks for the intro. So yeah, as I say, when all this happened back in March and we kind of found ourselves kind of having to move online, I just naturally was working with a family, and I started working with a family online, and that grew over time. That I grew into kind of a group where we met every week. So from the get-go, I started working online with kids. And if you'd asked me a year ago, would I do that? I would have said absolutely not. Like, I was allergic to Skype, wouldn't talk to my family on like even video call, just not my thing at all. But I've actually found from the whole experience that my point of view has completely shifted 360 to the point that I actually love working online and just want to keep doing that now from now on, to be honest. So I think the question we were kind of posed to think about was the challenges and successes or delights. And I liked the idea of delights the most, so I had loads for that. But challenges, we'll start there. The first one for me was definitely getting used to the technology. Like looking back on it now, I kind of think of is that the Zoom space that we were using as a venue in itself. And it's almost like a sort of outdoor venue where you have a certain amount of planning that you do, but there's always going to be something out of your control, which in an outdoor venue is the weather, but online is technical hitches. There's inevitably technical hitches. You can plan and plan and plan, but the good thing was that despite the fact that we did so many different events over the summer, it was actually quite rare that the technical hitches came into play in any big way. So I think the fear of all of that is sometimes overblown, that actually it's not usually so disruptive. And I suppose in terms of that, the advice that I would have for the idea of working online, if you're starting out, is just keep it really simple and test everything that you want to do thoroughly with somebody else online before you try it. So I started very simply like this with my laptop, just working plainly like this, and then I built on that by starting to show images and then play music. I haven't tried some features like using breakout rooms and different things like this, so there's lots to learn still, but I kind of tried to cultivate for myself what were the things that I needed to learn bit by bit. And now what I use is 2 cameras. I have like an overhead camera which shows what I'm doing on the desk, so I can kind of show and not always just be talking, and that works really well. So definitely the first challenge was just getting comfortable in the space and building and refining it for yourself. For visual arts, I had certain needs, but in different areas you might have completely different ones. And as part of that, I tried being a student as well. I joined an online class with the Princess Drawing School in London, which was brilliant because I got to experience it from the other side, and that really informed my way of working with it. And then I think the other big challenge is pace and leaving space and being really comfortable with silence, because as you're the facilitator, the way Zoom works, as we've all discovered with communication, is people can't really speak over each other. You have to really manage the background noise, you have to manage who can speak, and all of that. So you're thinking about all that all the time, and you're the one who's kind of gluing together the communication and doing quite a bit of talking. But it's important to leave the spaces. And one example I'll tell on that, which is definitely one that sticks out in my mind, is I was telling the story of Fintan Mac Bocra, who's this really interesting character. He lived a long time ago, and he was a very wise man who then became a very wise fish, and then became a very wise eagle, and then a very wise hawk, and finally ended up on the island of Achill with another wise hawk, and they could talk. And people used to come to them for all kinds of questions. And I told this story with children, and I was kind of weaving the tale as best I could. And then I said, you know, if you met this hawk who had learned the wisdom of the water, the rivers, the sea, learned the wisdom of the air, learned the wisdom of the land, and been alive for so long, like, what question would you ask this hawk? And the first time I asked that question, I wasn't comfortable with the silence. And I just said, like, for example, what am I going to have for lunch for tomorrow? I just made this really throwaway, jokey comment. And then I was met with more silence. And so we moved on. So I thought, why did I do that? So the next day I did the same exact thing, but this time I said, so what question would you ask this hawk? And I said nothing for what felt like a million years. And then one kid said, what happens when you die? And I went, yeah, okay, exactly. That is what you'd ask the hawk. And then another kid chimed in with them, is reincarnation real? And, you know, all these questions that had come up through them listening to the story that I didn't think of such good questions. Like, my questions were terrible. So that was a good lesson for me, to just remember to just leave the silence longer than I was even comfortable with. And sometimes you don't get a response, and that's okay. And just calmly you can move on. So that's definitely challenges. Delights, there was just a million. And please, Aisling, do stop me. I think my main delight overall was just that I genuinely loved it. And I found that kids were so generous. They just generally are, and they made it really easy. And from the get-go, meeting a group of new kids that I'd never met before, they were immediately kind of engaged in a way that I wasn't expecting, and kind of quite warm and responsive. And yeah, it was brilliant, and would make kind of unprompted comments like, this is great, you know, and things that kind of keep you going. And there was one moment that sticks out there, which was working with Assumption Junior, which is in Walkinstown. and it was myself and Kathy were on the call, and maybe I think Liam, and we were making some drawings. And as we were working, Kathy and everyone else as well was drawing too, which usually in a real life workshop we'd be too busy kind of, I suppose, facilitating the room to really do the work ourselves. So I had my head down and I was working, and they had their head down, they were working. At the end of the workshop, the kids were kind of sharing their work with us, and it was great. And then we were just about to wrap up, and one of them said, "Can we see the work the lady was making?" And they were talking about Kathy, and Kathy was able to hold up her drawing and share what she was doing. And suddenly that sort of space opened up where it felt like the adults in the room, we weren't just the helpers or the minders, that we too were participating. And I think that probably is possible in real world workshops, but I had never really managed it myself. So it just naturally occurred that then from then on, especially with those school workshops, the big part of it was this sort of sharing. Like you'd be like, "Oh, I'm kind of stuck. What am I going to do now?" And the kids would share back, and everybody in the room was working. And they knew that, and we knew that. It was just a nice space that opened up, like more of a studio feeling, which is great. And then definitely the fact that it opened up in terms of access. Like in one room, you might have kids from Galway, Donegal, Dublin. I mean, you could have kids from other countries even, of all sorts of ages, all backgrounds. And even just in the background, you know, there'd be a family with like one baby strapped to one of the parents, and then two kids up in the window like that, and all the life happening around them. And just that access was fab. And I think the fact that not only as an artist, you don't have to geographically move locations and lug materials around the world trying to get to venues, for families and for schools, it was also really great. And then just, I think the last thing I'll say there is just that I found personally that because of the fact that I was working directly from my studio, which I'm not today, but usually in my studio, the work that I was doing with the young people was in my space with me all the time. And I felt like everything that I'm making now is way more influenced by the audience that I want to make work for than ever before. My facilitation used to sit kind of as a sort of extra thing I was doing. It was like, I'm making my artwork and I facilitate for children. But now I feel like completely integrated. Things that are said or ideas that come across or that we share or develop together is now influencing my work completely. And also I'm able to test ideas and develop them. So in the trajectory of what we did with the ARC, it was, I'd come up with the idea for a workshop, and we'd do it with a couple of different groups of kids, maybe with schools, with public, in different contexts. And then after trialing it, then I'd make a video of that workshop. By the time of making that video, I've really figured out the pacing, honed it, and developed it. So then that video, it's more, I think, a better piece of work basically. And I've never got to experience that before. That really like consultation with the children, that really live interaction over time. So yeah, I think that's me run out of steam.
That's great, Duffy. There's loads of brilliant insights there. I'm glad there was loads of delights alongside the challenges. And Duffy facilitated workshops for a very wide range of ages as well. So that's just really interesting to hear your point of view on that as well, Duffy. So I'm going to move on now to Dave so that he can share his experiences with the highs and lows.
Hello, how's it going? This is my giant head. Apologies for being in the middle of your screens. Yeah, so as a writer, I feel quite lucky or privileged, I guess, because more so maybe than art, writing is very portable. So it's kind of easier to move that stuff online. You've sort of there's no need for, I guess, two cameras. Like, I don't know what the second camera would be doing, be like on my hands as I type or whatever. What I did find, just to start off maybe with the challenges, is that for me, a workshop for any age is all about breaking down the layer that pops up between a new author and putting work on the page. Like, any kind of aspiring author is always sort of frightened of this kind of blank page. And one thing I really try and get across to my students is that it doesn't matter what you put down, as long as you put down something, it can always be refined. I try and make it as easy as possible for people to get words down on the page. And that's why, like, you know, you see like venerable authors have their very specific techniques of getting up at 6 in the morning, or I have a friend who only writes on yellow legal paper with a thin Sharpie, and that's the only way she can do her first draft. And it's just about what breaks down that barrier between you and the thoughts in your head and what you're trying to say. And obviously when you're online, there's just a couple of extra static. There's just sometimes literally, whether it's a bad line or whether it's watching me on the phone instead of a bigger screen, or the dog barking, there's just a little bit more of a barrier there. And definitely as someone who sort of performs his workshops and is sort of like loud and energetic and just a giant like Labrador basically running around talking about books, there is just naturally a bit more dead air. And I'm sure we've all had that experience when we're teaching a workshop where you come in and there's just like an extra minute in between the introduction and you getting started. Or like I'm one of those people who I hate being in the room as the kids come in, because I like sort of like bursting out and being loud and sort of like setting the tone for the rest of the workshop. So there is just that little bit more when you're online, which can be difficult. And that's why teaming up with the ARC was so great, because they'd done so much work, back-end work, to smooth things out as much as possible. Like even just getting online 15 minutes beforehand so you could check in about stuff and getting to chat to the teacher beforehand did really balance out or alleviate the sort of natural awkwardness that comes with being on a screen. Also, I feel like there is something really powerful about being in a space and knowing that you came there to write. Like it's the cafe thing. Like I go to cafes a lot to write, and because I lugged my giant stupid laptop in there, and because I don't want to be that cliche of someone who sits in Starbucks and doesn't do any writing. So like, I feel like I'm there and I'm doing it. And, you know, that's why I always say to people, you shouldn't maybe write in your bedroom, because, you know, you should have a place that is for your work if you can. And that's a little bit challenging, because like there are people coming in and out of shot, and the kids are sort of maybe not for the first couple of minutes in that mindset of working and stuff. And but I did feel maybe the first 2 or 3 minutes after we got started, it did sort of, everything else kind of fell away and we were like there to work basically. Also, for me at least, for me, writing is about two things. It's about skill and energy. And like skill can be taught. I kind of firmly believe that. I'd be a very hypocritical writing teacher if I didn't. And while energy is something that has to come from the individual, I feel it's my job to sort of demonstrate energy. And so I come in and I'm like, you know, 200% excited about everything we're doing. And I find, especially for young people, that sort of gets them through that barrier of thinking that writing isn't cool or whatever. Not that I'm a cool person, but like they see that like I'm very excited about it, and that can sometimes kind of be contagious. And for me, moving on to Zoom, I find that we were talking about this earlier, that Zoom, I feel, cuts 30% of the energy out of every interaction. And I did a writer's room for a TV thing a while ago, and normally in a writer's room, you have the big whiteboard and you're scribbling things down, and it's just a sort of electric sense of momentum. And that's very hard to replicate, I find, online. And you also have to be very careful in how you compensate for that, because otherwise you're just shouting, and that's not really what you want to do. So like when I'm in person, I stride around and I wave my arms and I act silly to show that writing can and should be silly. And it's harder to do that like over Zoom. Also with feedback, feedback is where I pour a huge amount of my energy in when I'm doing a writing workshop. I make a fuss of people because everybody loves getting complimented, and there's always at least one thing about someone's work you can pick out and hold up like a jewel and say, look, I did this, isn't that great? And it's a little harder, I found, to do that over Zoom. It's hard to be giddy, I guess, online. But with all that being said, in terms of successes and delights, which is great, being part of a wider program and having a very specific theme was really helpful. Like, because we are not in that space, and because it's a little more informal, because the ARC had done so much work to, they had the idea of doing activity sheets beforehand, which I think was really great because it meant the kids weren't just sitting there with a blank page in front of them. They already had some of the parameters set. And because I wasn't doing this stuff on my own, but was part of a chain of different artists with different disciplines, I felt it sort of reinforced what we were doing and made it a little bit easier for kids to feel like they were in a classroom in spirit, if not maybe physically. Also, because this is sort of a weird benefit of being online, you ended up with the kids who really wanted to be there. And like, you know, the way, like I've done workshops in schools where I show up and the kids are like, are you the new maths teacher? Because they haven't been told they're having a workshop, and the first 10 minutes of the gig is spent explaining to them that I'm a writer and I write books. But then I've also had the experience of walking into a workshop, and maybe it's been a tough day and I'm just like trying to like pull energy out of myself, but all the kids are volunteered kids who like chose to be here, and you're just dealing with like, you know, the next generation of writers, and that's really, really lovely. So like all the kids who were there really wanted to be there, and they were there to commit to it, and that was really lovely. I also felt there was a weird sort of intergenerational aspect, because not all the time, but you did have parents sitting in sometimes or being sort of just off screen. And as somebody who is like the weird creative one in my family, and my parents maybe were very supportive of my creativity, but maybe didn't have the language to support that, except just for like pushing me into libraries all the time. It was really lovely to see parents and kids interacting, or just having the parents be present and have the kid be open and read out their work and share stuff in that proximity. And I think that might lead to a more open sort of conversation between them in terms of like just being aware of what the kid is into and what they like writing. And then sort of like finally the kind of big success thing that like I felt was that it worked. Like it just worked. We're in this massively uncertain time. Nobody knows what's going to happen next. And there were small kinks and not quite perfect things, but it looks like we're gonna be dealing with this for a long time. And I feel that the workshops in the ARC, they felt much better and more polished than what you call a prototype, but the model does work and the engagement was there. And I feel that like if we have to put up with this for longer, and it looks like we can do this. And it's just like I've done workshops that just didn't work, and I tried with exercises that just flatlined, and this works, and we can polish it over time. But yeah, no, it was all good. Also, the kids were just amazing. Like kids are much more resilient than me as a tortured artist, and they matched and outdid my expectations for young people dealing with a weird model of a weird event at a weird time. So yeah, it was fun.
Great, thanks Dave so much. That was really insightful. And I totally appreciate what you're saying about that, you know, I guess, you know, if you're on stage, you have to double up your energy, and there's an element that isn't there with Zoom, that maybe you have to go even a bit further to try and get the energy across, which is definitely a bit of a challenge, yeah. But great to hear the successes as well. And that intergenerational thing, I think is definitely has been a major plus. I would say it's sort of a theme across all the workshops really. Okay. Yeah, which is really nice to hear. So last but certainly not least, I'm going to pass over to Joanna Parkes, who ran a lot of our early years workshops in drama during the summer. So over to you, Joanna.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, so well, when I was first asked way back earlier in this year to think about doing online workshops, I have to say my initial response was kind of a mixture of fear, terror, and because I'd never done anything like that. My questions were, how do I engage with a group of children that I'm not in the room with them? How do I connect? How do I know what they're doing? Especially my workshops doing drama, we move around a lot. There might be moments of sitting down, but there's a lot of activity and there's a lot of moving around. So my big concern was, how do I engage and how do I connect? And certainly before the first workshop, I was definitely, I mean, it was probably more sort of scared and nervous than I've been for a long time, but I think even that is good, because sometimes when you've been working for a long time, you can get quite complacent and you can kind of just do the same thing over and over again. So this was really good because it was kind of really pushing the boundaries. So my big thing initially was that idea of connection. So what I tried to do when I was planning the workshops was to have as many opportunities as possible where the children had the opportunity to decide what was going to happen next or to engage in that way. So I don't have it here, but I had like a spinner with different animals on, and then we'd spin it around as part of our workshop games, and then they'd shout stop, and whatever animal we stopped on, that was the animal we all pretended to be. So it was a way of them connecting like that. Also, from the very beginning, well, because they were so young, we sort of stipulated that adults had to be there with them. So, so when we were doing workshops, warm-ups and activities, from the very beginning, I sort of asked the adult if they could join in and be part of it. And I made sure that they had a role in it, which kind of meant that we were all engaged. There was nobody kind of sitting down just watching. I tried ideas of trying to do a high five. So if we all came up to the camera at the same time and did high five, so that we'd all sort of feel that we were part of the same thing. So, I mean, I was pleasantly surprised at the end of the first one. I was like, oh, wow, got through it. Everybody survived. And actually, the kids seemed to really, really enjoy it. And what I really noticed from the very beginning was because the children and the parents were in their own homes, there was an immediate sense of comfort and relaxation. Like, I feel that possibly, you know, whenever I've done the workshops live, like, some parents will engage, but you'll always maybe have some who feel a bit self-conscious or awkward. But the parents, because they're in their own space and the children were in their own space, they felt really, well, it seemed from where I was that the parents and the children were more relaxed, more comfortable in their own home. The children were also asked before each workshop to prepare some props and some objects and some items. We had picnics together, so the children brought their own toys and their own picnic things. And then this is my whiny orangutan. He was in one of the workshops. So we'd be kind of sharing food with each other. The children would be feeding the orangutan so he could come up to be fed. So, and because again, it's their own toys, and they were sort of delighted to be sharing their own toys with everybody. So I think that was one of my big delights, was just, you also get there's a kind of a feeling that you sort of felt privileged to be invited into these people's houses. And even though you didn't know them, you could kind of get a sense of who they were. I think, as Duffy said, you know, because there'd be people in the background and people would be coming through and seeing what was going on. I remember one time I was asking them to run around and they had to touch things in the room, like their favorite color, their favorite place to hide. And the first time I did it, I forgot to say, stay in the room, because apparently one boy ran off and was under the bed. So his mum had to go and pull him back out again. But there's just that sense of kind of playfulness, and that the whole house is the playground and everybody's involved, which was really nice. The other thing, the other thing that I really appreciated was actually having the support of the ARC during the process, because I hadn't really thought about this before, but it's really great when you're running the workshop that you're not the one who's kind of worried about, you know, who can be heard and the spotlight and the muting. So it was great to have it was often Clara and Aisling there to kind of give that support, and also to talk about it at the end, because one of my, I suppose, challenges is that I did find at the end of the workshop, usually, you know, you chat to the kids on the way out and the parents, and you get a sense of how they enjoyed it and what happened. But that was the one thing I found a little bit flat, because it's kind of everybody clicks off their screen, and then, you know, you've put all this time and energy and effort, and then you're just like, oh, so how did that go? So that's still an ongoing challenge. I'm finding I'm still doing more online workshops. And that is the one thing that would be my big challenge, is to try and find a way, maybe at the end of the workshop, to have an individual connection with each child before they go. So I get a bit of a sense of how did they find it, because it's very hard when a child is only this big on your screen and you've got 10 of them. I suppose that would be my other challenge, would be to see what they're actually doing. You don't want to be kind of peering in like this. You might terrify them. And also sometimes you miss things that they say. And that was another thing that was great, that Clara or Aisling would sometimes say, oh, I think you missed, or I think somebody wants to say something. So those were the challenges. I didn't have, to date, I didn't have any technical challenges at all. I was all, in that way, it all went really smoothly. But I really, really came to appreciate just having that extra support. And then at the end, you know, just being able to say, and then sometimes people would say, oh, did you notice when somebody did this, that, and the other? So in terms of another delight or positive, in June I worked then with 2 classes from a preschool in Rutland Street, and that was really lovely because unlike the other workshops, all the children knew each other and they hadn't seen each other for ages, and the teachers clearly just had so much warmth and I suppose you'd go far as say love for their children, because there was just this amazing bubble of kind of warmth and energy, and they were seeing each other in their homes. They hadn't seen each other for a few weeks, and they're all like, oh, how are you, and how's the baby, and all this kind of thing. And the baby was brought in to show that the baby was fine. So that was lovely. You kind of really felt like you were part of something very warm and special as these people were all coming together in their own homes and seeing each other. And one funny thing that happened in that workshop, which I suppose isn't necessarily very complimentary about the workshop, but it was quite funny. So one boy had got a new bike, and he was very, very keen to show his new bike to the rest of his class. Even in the workshop, he was on his mum's phone. So he took the phone and he left the room and he went outside and he got on the bike. And he was riding around his little cul-de-sac on the bike in the middle of the workshop. So it was a bit disorientating and you got a bit dizzy because the phone was on the front of the bike and it was being wheeled all around. But it was just, in a way, it was just nice because he just wanted to make that connection with his classmates. And also it's that idea of, you know, he felt very comfortable in the space. So I think those are my delights. I mean, in terms of from here on in, like, this is now a whole new, I suppose it's a whole new way of working, which for me is definitely going to be continuing for the next while. I'm going to be starting working with whole classes, which is going to be very different. I haven't done that yet. So that's a big challenge. And I'm also going to be doing online lecturing in 3rd level, which is going to be another whole, you know, that's another whole challenge. But it's certainly been like a very, you know, it's been a very exciting 3 months. Like, I've really enjoyed the opportunity to try this. I never thought I'd take to it. I still feel a little bit mad just being by myself in the room, leaping around. I'm always wondering if my neighbours look in, they'll see me pretending to be an elephant all by myself, walking around the room, having no idea what's going on or whatever. But it's been a lot of fun, and I think it is. You know, there are advantages. Like, sometimes we kind of, you know, we think of all the ways that we're distant and not together. But I was thinking, I think Duffy said this as well, like, definitely an advantage is that you can work with children who might not be able to come into the ARC. They might be too far away, or that just might not be something that their family would think to do, but this might be a way to reach a much way to meet a much wider range of children from anywhere, you know, however far, however distant. So I think that's a really good thing. But also children who maybe have social anxiety, or who would find being in a room with lots of noisy, loud other children, I think this kind of way of working can be perfect because the family can kind of manage all of that within their own space. So going forward, I'm trying to look at I suppose the positives, like, how can this work? What can we take from it that's actually advantageous? And I mean, it is, as this title of this, it is a brave new world, and we do have to kind of try new things. But I think that's, and I suppose just, I mean, I would say just if anybody's in the position of, like, you know, contemplating it, like, I certainly was very apprehensive before, and I was happily surprised. So I guess just, as Duffy said, make it simple and just give it a go and try it. Maybe just work with a few children the first time and then build it up and see where it goes. So I think that's me done.
Great. Thanks, Joanna. Some brilliant insights there. Yeah, really a lot of great food for thought. I'm just going to ask a couple of questions to the panel, and then we're going to go on to, I know I've been hearing from Clara that there's been lots of great questions coming in on the chat box, so thanks everybody. I'm just going to ask a couple of quick questions to the panel, and then we're going to go to your questions as well from the audience. So all three of you touched on this in some way, but I'm just wondering if any of you would be up for maybe talking a little bit more on, you know, I suppose in the beginning, many of us, ourselves included, probably looked on this as a sort of a holding space, let's say, you know, a stopgap to get us over what we thought was going to be only a few months of this challenge. But, you know, what are the advantages? I know obviously there's stuff like access. So there's obviously a lot of advantages in terms of audiences and being able to reach audiences, but also like in terms of your artistic practice, you know, do you see how this might actually develop your practice in new and interesting ways, not just as something that you kind of have been forced to do, if you know what I mean? So are there any feedback or thoughts on that aspect of things from any of the three of you?
Yeah, I suppose that one thing that I definitely feel I'm going to work on now from this, or learn from this, because I did at the start, I was like, I'll be back in schools by October, and October 2021 maybe, hopefully now, but and stuff. But one thing is that I'm used to kind of just showing up, doing my thing. There's very little prep. I don't ask a lot from the schools, because I feel like I can't, because they already have so much on, and you don't want to assume they've done a lot of prep, because if you show up and they haven't, then what do you do? Whereas now I feel like because there's sort of, I feel like there's the chance to sort of develop my writing workshops further, because now they're necessarily going to have to prep more and stuff. And like, so I feel like I can sort of come up with cool, interesting things to sort of prime them for the hour just that I show up. And I think that might be, yeah, I think that's going to be an interesting challenge for me, and I'm excited to do that, and sort of I can get deeper. There's only so much you can do in an hour when you just show up and you sort of open the bag and whatever, whereas now I feel like I can sort of build up to the workshop a bit more, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so you can kind of give the workshops maybe a bit of a more individual identity, or
a bit more depth, or sort of leave them with them, almost to compensate for the lack of being there physically. I'm gonna like maybe have a pack that they can have afterwards, which is like, here's a month's worth of like writing tips that draw on what I give in the workshop, or even give them a few weeks of writing tips that lead up to the actual workshop and stuff. So yeah, we'll see.
Oh, great. Joanna, Duffy?
Yeah, no, I was just thinking of something. I think one thing that I've definitely changed is how I use props and objects. And I've been, I suppose, forced to think slightly more filmically. So like, there was, just remembering, there was one point in one of my stories when it was this orangutan who was dropped the banana into a pond, and I was trying to work out how to do that, and I had like mirrors and I realized, like, I wouldn't normally, if I just had the kids in front of me, I just, however I did it, I wouldn't have to think about it this much, but I was kind of having to think more like, I suppose, a film director, and I was trying to angle the mirror and looking in the screen and seeing what they're seeing. So I suppose for me, it's been that idea of looking at things more from the outside in, and sort of trying to make things more significant, and movements more significant, and objects and props more significant, because you've got such a small space, and also you keep their attention. So I think for me, that would be a big thing, is just more, I suppose, using the puppets in a more, like, do more actual sort of like puppetry, you know, and thinking of that idea of how the puppet moves, whereas before, because there's so much going on, they mightn't focus in the same way, but I just feel that that's something that I've had to be rethinking about.
Oh, great. And Duffy?
Yeah, I think it's similar to what Joanna was saying before about the experiences being online being so warm, and I find that like the warmth and the joy and the playfulness that happened, it really helped my practice, because what I want to do is make work like images and stories for children. And when I was doing my master's, there was no children involved in any of the work we did. We didn't test our work with audiences. It wasn't seen as part of the process at all, even though I knew that consulting with children is a really great thing to do. It just didn't exist. And then to come to this summer of story making with children, it really opened me up. So I find if I'm working on my own in my studio, there's a lot of points where it becomes tortuous and you kind of start to like doubt yourself, and your fears come in, you get blocked. But when working with the children, it just was this like moment to remember to stay playful, to enjoy it. And like what Dave was saying, that energy, like the energy you bring to the page. And I think that I've learned so much, and I just want to find ways to continue having this window to work with children and have access to that joy and that playfulness, to keep things light. You know, that's been massive for me, my art practice anyway.
Thanks so much, all three of you. So I think we have 10 minutes left, so I believe we have lots of questions coming from the audience. So I'm going to pass over to my colleagues Liam and Clara, who are going to put some of those questions to our panel now. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone. So we have one in from Lisa Mahoney. It says, do you think a technical support service for artists to work online, maybe funded by DCC or the Arts Council, would be of help, or a small grant to purchase streaming equipment? So would anyone like to take that first?
Can I just say a quick note on that, which would be that Clara, who was just speaking there, is an unreal assistant to have in the room. Like, the work that was done in the background by the art was fantastic, but I can't tell you how great it was, Clara, having you there. And I think that it would be an amazing service if artists could hire and budget in to have somebody like that in the room. Like, I can't tell you the difference it makes. It's huge. Yeah,
and I suppose just on that, from the arts point of view, I mean, well done, Clara. I mean, we were just figuring it out as we went, so none of us knew this in advance. But I suppose under normal circumstances, we have our technical team and we would have our front of house team. So we have a practice around having support staff basically for events. So we try to just map that onto the online space. So we still had those people, and we were doing slightly different things to or doing it slightly differently to how we normally would. But it did seem to really work. So it's great to hear as well that, you know, for the artists, and in a similar way to how it would be live, it is about facilitating the artists to focus on the art and the process of delivering a workshop, so they don't have to be worried about anything technical, or, you know, a parent who, you know, needs to leave the room to answer the phone or whatever. Like, and that's the kind of stuff that all our support staff would deal with live in a live space. Yeah. So sorry, Dave, you go ahead.
Sorry, no, yeah, because it's not even just when people talk about like technical difficulties, it's not even just the idea of a bad connection, but it's things like only for the ARC explaining things like, oh, we've made sure that the kids can't message each other, and we've made sure that all the names thing. I was like, I didn't even think of that. So there's so much. I know we've all weirdly become Zoom experts in the last few months because we've had to be, but like knowing that I could just focus on my stuff, and that like I could read questions that popped up from the kids in the chat pretty easily because the groups weren't gigantic, but I didn't have to, like, I think if the ARC weren't there, I would have been glued to it so I didn't miss anything, but it made my job and life just so much easier. So that was really, really great. I think that is a thing, because like Zoom, if you don't pay for it, is a 15-minute or is a 40-minute thing. So I've recently I bought the premium Zoom membership thing, and there are now new costs, like getting a webcam, getting, like, I'm wearing my silly NASA mic thing because it just kind of helps, and it like there are new costs now that go beyond the idea of like buying paper and pens and other things you might need for a workshop. And I think while I would be maybe skeptical of a brand new system that is like built solely, that seems like it's maybe better to find one that already exists and make sure it's like a good one, although I know like Zoom has its problems and stuff. But like even just a small grant for equipment so that you can be set up with a good mic, a good webcam, because that stuff all becomes so much more important when you're streaming or when you're on a voice call and things like that.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, I don't know that I have that much more to add, but I mean, I think it would be, another thing would be great. I think this was at the start of the question about sharing, wasn't there? So, I mean, I do think, because I know so little, I know so many other I know there's loads of stuff you can do out there, but often when you look at other things, they're very, very business orientated, you know, and it's all kind of corporate. So I don't know who would do it or how it would happen, but it would be great if there was some way of collecting and sharing sort of online tools that work in a more creative, artistic way. So yeah, I think that would be a great idea. I don't know who'll do it, but they'd have my support.
Great, thanks everyone. So we have one in from Lucy Hill. That's for Duffy. It says, wow, Duffy, so many amazing and exciting insights. Do you think that the medium of drawing is particularly good for online work, especially around the idea of shared collaborative style of facilitation? Can you see the collaborative method working across other visual art mediums as well as it does with drawing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think before I'd done all this, I wouldn't have thought it would have been good or advantageous. It just so happened that it landed that the focus was going to be story making and drawing. And over time refined the fact that there was an overhead camera where people could see my hands. And yeah, that's a good question. A very good question. I suppose the aspect to it is the fact that for part of what we did, we sent out art packs. So something that was apparent, I think with the schools workshops we did early on, where kids were in their own homes, was that some of the kids were turning up and they only had it was like a copybook page and a biro, and that was the extent of their art materials. That was it. So I think if you're going to work in other visual art ways, I think providing things like that would be important. Because I think the majority of households don't have, I grew up in a house where there was art material, so I kind of forget. I was surprised to find just how many households just don't have things that I think are basic, like a Pritt stick, you know? So I think drawing, at least you can have a biro and a copybook and you can come and you can take part and it's brilliant. But I think if you're doing anything beyond that, you need to think about providing packs or supplies. Yeah. I think you could do some really cool, exciting stuff with that though.
Brilliant. Thanks a million, Duffy. So we have 2 questions here related to kind of class sizes that I'm going to pop together. So Juliette Samond said how many kids would have been involved typically in a school session. And Kim Sharkey said, what number of participants through Zoom interactive classes do the artists feel is most successful? So would anyone like to take that?
I can start there. So we limited my workshops to 10 and 10 households. So you might have 2 children in one house, but 10 households. Often we didn't always get no, actually, was it 8? Have I said that wrong?
I think it was actually 6 for the seedlings ones. Yeah.
Oh, I got that all wrong. I'm doing workshops elsewhere and it's at 10. But yes, no, you're right. It was 6. So that would be much smaller than when I was doing it live. That probably was a good number because it meant in terms of the screen, you could kind of, on a very basic level, the box was big enough that you could see what was going on in each house and you didn't have to keep changing the focus. But that is very small. 6 is quite small, but I think you possibly could in a school certainly push it up a little bit more. Like a lot of preschools, they go up to 10. I can't imagine doing it with, well, certainly what I do with a class of 30, but I'll let you know in a few months' time how that works. But I think if you want to have individual interaction with each child, you can't really go more than, I wouldn't say you can go many more than 10, just in terms of the size that they're going to be on your screen and your ability to kind of look in and see what's going on.
Particularly, I think, Joanna, because your age group was like 2 to 4, which was a big reason why, for a bit of context, that was the reason why we, with the early years workshops in particular, had such a small capacity. We did have bigger groups for both Dave and Duffy's workshops. Do either of you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So for the workshops we were doing, I think it was for the public, it was 15. And I actually, as Joanna says, it's kind of interesting with Zoom more to think of it as households, because really what you're talking about is kind of screens. Can you see the screens? And if there's siblings, 2 or 3 or 4 of them working in one household, in a way that doesn't really feel like that many extra children. But I think the max you'd really want is 20, and the best number is somewhere around 15 in terms of being able to actually interact and for everyone to get the chance to show what they're making. Because the pace is slower in terms of just getting around the room. Yeah, so, and then in schools, we had some really beautiful ones which were in the summer provision, which were groups of kids up to about 6 in a room with one teacher, and that was absolutely gorgeous and perfect. Loved it. And then we went up as far as 12, which was one teacher with 12 kids. And I think for that you could do a full class size. It's just the model starts to sort of change. You really have to build a relationship with that teacher, and they become extremely important because you can't hear anything that's happening in that room at all. You couldn't hope to, and they have to kind of ferry messages to you and vice versa. And then the kids need to kind of get used to the idea that they come to the laptop to speak to you individually if they want to. So it kind of just becomes a bit of a different workshop, but I think it's possible, and I think there could be some really cool stuff done with full classes as well.
Yeah, like I think that Duffy's exactly right. When it's about the amount of screens that you're seeing, like I've got a workshop coming up with a school where it's going to be 200 second year boys. Why am I doing this to myself? But it's split into 8 classes, so it should be 8 screens. But the teacher, as Duffy says, will be the person I'm talking to in terms of getting their questions, and we're really trying to lay the groundwork to make that work. Like I think it's, you know, when I'm in person, I always say to schools that, like, you know, give me 30 or 300, I'm the same volume, I just give the same amount of energy. That's just can't be true over Zoom. So you have to really design the whole workshop around that specific amount of people. I know I've done a couple of school visits to American schools over Zoom before, and yeah, like you can't hear anything. It's very hard as somebody who sort of lives and dies by the applause to know if they're enjoying it or not. So it does throw off your rhythm a little bit. But it's something I think we're going to have to, I don't think it's feasible to keep. I think there was maybe, I think the most we had in mine with the ARC was maybe 20. Am I right with that?
Yeah, I think that sounds right.
And that gave me a chance to hear everybody. Although, and this is something that you do in regular in-person stuff as well, is that you very swiftly realize when you call on a kid whether they want to be talked to or not. And so, you know, if you've got 30 kids in a classroom, I know in the first 10 minutes, okay, I hope that kid is enjoying it, but I'm not going to put them on the spot by asking them, whereas there's one kid who's going to answer every single time. And that is really heightened online. Maybe someone's got a bad connection, or they're just too nervous to say something with the format. And so you do still have to do that arithmetic basically when it's on Zoom. So some things change and some things stay the same.
Great.
I think we probably have time for maybe one more quick question, Clara.
Okay, I have one from Kira here. Do you think the pre-recorded videos can work as well for engagement, or live in person is the way to go? Just thinking regarding working with school groups who may not be able to use online video call platforms.
Yeah, I mean, so all of the artists this summer made videos as well, which we did, as Duffy mentioned, we did that kind of after they'd done the workshops a couple of times so that it would be nicely fluent, I suppose, and feel less awkward really to do. And we did that partially to try and bridge that digital divide, which I think is what that question is kind of leaning towards, because we're very conscious of that too. Not every child has a laptop at home or even access necessary to a phone or stable Wi-Fi. We also did it because we didn't know how long we were going to be in this scenario, and that we would be trying to, I suppose, bank some of the wonderful content that has been developed for the summer, so we could share that with other people in different ways in the future. But from my point of view at the ARC, as the producer, I would say that what's very challenging about the video is not getting the feedback from the audience. So it's really hard to know. We can see how many people viewed it, But other than that, like, did they like it? Did they do it? Did they do it to the end? We have found it difficult to get people to actually send a response and say, "Oh, I had a great time watching that video," or "I didn't enjoy that at all," or or anything, or a photograph of something they've made, or So that, I think, for us, that's been difficult, and just needing that feedback and not being able to complete that loop is a little bit more difficult, I think, with the video format. That's certainly my experience so far. I don't know if the artists have anything else to say on that.
I actually think that, Aisling, that's exactly. Whereas with the live classes, we've learned so much because we've gotten so much feedback in the moment and afterwards and everything. With the videos, you put them into the world, and then I think I still have yet to figure out how to capture feedback and develop it in the same kind of exciting, dynamic way. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, like on one side it's definitely like the easy cheaty method where you can do it beforehand and then you hand it over and people can kind of do it what they will and stuff. I found that, like, I've been recording a few of them for different places, and it has the first few, like, you do it on your phone. I do write a script because even if I don't exactly stick to it, it is useful to have. And like for 5 or 8 minute ones, which I think were the length of the ones we did for the arc, I don't feel the pain of not having the pain. It's very melodramatic. I don't feel the not having the audience there. I recently did an hour-long one for a school, but it was responding to letters it sent me, so that was able to, I was able to sort of compensate for the lack of an audience by just finding what they were saying kind of hilarious. But it just, on once, yeah, it feels a little lacking, and you really have to overcompensate with energy. The other thing as well then which I mentioned at the start of the stream is that I recently downloaded video editing software because I've felt the need to sort of compensate for the lack of audience and the lack of energy being in the room with like more overlays and like an opening graphic and like nothing fancy because I still have no idea how to do it. But I think if I was doing an hour-long workshop, I would need to learn how to like put things up in the screen and like, explain things back and forth. Whereas weirdly in person, I don't feel that as much. I feel that I'm speaking directly to them, so I know they're hearing it. Even though a pre-record, they can rewind and rewatch, or the teacher can pause it. Whereas obviously in person they can't, but I can hear if they don't hear it or if they don't get it, I can go back over things. So I think it is easier, but that's also makes it more demanding because that you have to push more into the energy and push more into the production values, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there is a role for it because certainly you want to be inclusive, and that was our main aim. And I just want to say thanks again to all the artists for being so willing to give it a try, because we don't expect, I think it's unreasonable to expect anyone to suddenly turn themselves into a filmmaker overnight. And we worked with a video editing company to take the footage and give it a bit more polish. And we hope the schools will engage with those videos over the autumn. But I think for me, it's part of a solution. But I feel like, having the live thing is still really important, even if it is over Zoom and not in face-to-face. But you want to be inclusive and you want to give materials that can be accessed at any time that suits people or suits teachers or parents or whatever. So yeah, I think it's part of the ecology. That'd be my take on it anyway. Joanna, do you have anything to add there?
Well, I was just going to say, I do think there is a role for it, definitely. And I do think it's like, it means that, the work can reach a lot more children. When I did it, it was a workshop that I think I'd done 4 times live. So that certainly helped. But the thing I found, I suppose, the most challenging was to try and be authentic and not to sound like I was kind of being one of those TV presenters that's totally over the top and that everything, waiting for the pause and going, wow, that's brilliant, when you hadn't heard anything. It's very easy to kind of almost go into that sort of almost becoming a clown and going brilliant when you haven't heard anything. So I had to try, and it was just kept on trying to sort of just do what I did when the children were actually there. And then if there was a time where I wanted responses, just to leave a pause and then just to say, you know, well, you know, I'm sure you came up with some great ideas, and let's move on, rather than doing that, wow, that was brilliant all the time. So it's hard sometimes I felt, to stay authentic. That was my big push, was just to try and stay real. But I do think it's got potential, and probably, you know, in terms of getting work to lots more children, it's probably a really good way to go.
Great point, Joanna. Well, I'm very sorry, everyone. We've gone over time, and I'm sure we haven't got to all your brilliant questions. But I think we need to wrap up at this stage. We are, just let you know, we're hoping to do a series of these. As you know, as time rolls on, we'll be doing more experiments with our programming, and we'll, you know, obviously find a lot of value in sharing that and reflecting on it together with an audience. So I just want to thank you all again for being here. I'd really like to thank again our panel artists in particular, Duffy Mooney-Sheppard, Joanna Parkes and Dave Rudden, and also our 3 other summer artists, Lucy Hill, Anita Mahan and Monica Munoz, who all did fantastic work as well. And thank you all for taking the time to be with us today. Thanks to my colleagues for making today and the summer program happen so smoothly. And if you are interested, if you're an artist, you can join up to our free artist club, which has a number of different benefits, and it's also a really handy way of staying in touch with us and hearing about different events like this that we're doing for artists, as well as call outs and opportunities, and our coffee mornings, which we do regularly, which are far less formal events. It's just a kind of an online meetup really for artists, people working in the area of work for children. So maybe some of those things might interest you, but in any case, I hope this morning was fruitful and worth your time. And thanks again for being here, and hopefully see you at something else again soon.